Police use of force and misconduct in California. Key takeaways. Over the past decade, the high-profile deaths of civilians, especially black civilians, at the hands of law enforcement have heightened public scrutiny over policing and created momentum for state reforms. In this report, we examine the available data to provide a baseline understanding of police use of force and misconduct in California. While most use of force incidents are not considered misconduct, civilian fatalities and injuries, particularly of unarmed individuals, can nevertheless harm the public's trust in law enforcement. All parties should be aligned in accurately documenting these incidents and reducing their frequency. About 195 people die each year from interactions with California law enforcement. Gunshots are by far the most common cause of death. Nearly 250 people are shot by police each year. Vehicle and pedestrian stops account for about 15% of police encounters in which a civilian is seriously injured or killed. More than 4 in 10 people treated for non-fatal gunshot wounds from a police encounter were diagnosed with a mental health condition, an alcohol or substance-related disorder, or both. In about 80% of encounters resulting in death or a gunshot wound, the civilian was armed with a weapon, underscoring the risky environments officers face. However, when we also consider civilians who sustained other serious injuries, 56% were unarmed. Black Californians are about 3 times more likely to be seriously injured, shot, or killed by the police relative to their share of the state's population. These racial disparities narrow after controlling for contextual factors, e.g., the reason for the interaction, but continue to persist. Of the over 78,000 law enforcement officers in California, about 80 are arrested each year. Assault is the most common reason for arrest. Data on arrested officers does not capture the full range of police misconduct. Improving existing data sources will be vital to shed more light on police use of force and misconduct in California. Introduction. In the summer of 2020, the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis Police Department officer precipitated widespread protests and amplified calls for policing reform. This killing came after years of high-profile deaths of black civilians, including Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and Stephon Clark, among others, during encounters with police and refocused efforts among policymakers at all levels of government to increase police accountability and transparency. At the federal level, Congress was considering major reforms related to policing practices and law enforcement accountability, though legislators were unable to reach an agreement on a final bill. 1. The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act would have, among several other provisions, established national standards for police use of force, required state and local law enforcement agencies to report use of force data, and created a nationwide registry for police misconduct to make it more difficult for officers to change jurisdictions after committing misconduct. In the last several years, California has already implemented many reforms through state legislation, including requiring local law enforcement agencies to report incidents of serious use of force, permitting public access to law enforcement records for certain misconduct and use of force incidents, and establishing an independent board and data collection effort aimed at reducing racial disparities in police encounters. To support these efforts, in 2015, the California Department of Justice, DOJ, launched Open Justice, an online data repository designed to strengthen trust, enhance government accountability, and improve public policy in the criminal justice system. More recently, Governor Newsom signed several bills on policing reform, including the creation of a decertification process for officers who have committed serious misconduct and expanding access to police misconduct records. Given the inherent risks of working in law enforcement, officers are legally able to use force, including physical restraints, tasers, blunt force objects like batons, and firearms, when needed to restore safety, make an arrest, and/or protect themselves or others from harm. While the use of force is one of many tools afforded to officers to perform their duties, there are distinctions made when this force becomes excessive or unreasonable given the circumstances of the situation. However, the delineation between reasonable and excessive force is not always clear, and there is no universal set of rules governing when or how officers should use force. National Institute of Justice 2020. The legal standard to evaluate whether excessive force merits criminal charges has changed as well. In 2019, the California State Legislature passed Assembly Bill 392, which changed the standard for deadly force from when reasonable to effect an arrest, to when necessary to defend against an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or to another person. An officer's decision to use force may be related to many different contextual factors. Some of these factors include the officer's level of training and experience, the reason for the encounter, e.g., a crime in progress or a pedestrian/vehicle stop, and whether the civilian is armed and/or putting the officer or others at imminent risk. In addition, behavioral health conditions like mental illness and/or substance use may contribute to a civilian's erratic behavior or inability to follow verbal commands, which can escalate a police encounter. Police misconduct refers to incidents in which an officer's actions are deemed outside of the code of conduct. While excessive use of force is grounds for misconduct, for which an officer may be disciplined or face criminal charges, most cases of use of force are considered legally and procedurally justified. It is also important to keep in mind that misconduct may occur while an officer is off duty and may not involve the use of force at all, e.g., obstructing justice, driving under the influence, or engaging in other illegal acts. Even in cases where police use of force is considered legally justified, civilian deaths and injuries resulting from police encounters, particularly those of unarmed individuals, remain deeply concerning. These incidents clearly have serious consequences for those involved, and they can also have far-reaching implications for how communities engage with law enforcement, potentially creating challenges for maintaining public safety and officer safety, too. One of the major challenges in developing effective policies related to police use of force, and especially police misconduct, is the lack of available information. La Vigna and Austin, Jr., 2021. Regarding police use of force, there are ongoing but currently limited federal efforts to collect data on the deaths of people involved with the criminal justice system, and state legislation has recently established some useful data resources in this area. 3. However, government sources on police misconduct at either the state or federal level are scant and often inconsistently reported. As a supplement to governmental resources, journalists and researchers have also created data repositories based on crowdsourced information, reporting, and public records requests to document deaths resulting from police encounters and instances of police misconduct. The goal of these efforts, such as fatal encounters and the Stinson database of arrested officers, is to create informational resources that are not reliant on the criminal justice system for collection and to make the data publicly available. In this report, our goal is to document the available data on police use of force and misconduct in California and provide policymakers and stakeholders with an assessment of what they can, and cannot, tell us about these serious issues. In the first section, we outline and compare the available sources of information on police use of force incidents in California. We then provide a descriptive analysis of civilian fatalities and serious injuries resulting from police encounters and discuss contextual factors associated with police use of force. The second section examines racial and ethnic disparities in serious use of force incidents and analyzes how these disparities change after controlling for various circumstances of the incident, the law enforcement agency, and the closest city in which the stop took place. The third section describes the information available on police misconduct and provides statistics on arrests of police officers, highlighting how this database can provide a framework for California if it considers creating its own database on police misconduct. We conclude with a discussion of how the available data on police use of force and misconduct can be improved to better inform policy and practice. Documenting police use of force. In this section, we describe the available data sources on police use of force and discuss the insights they provide on civilian deaths and serious injuries resulting from interactions with law enforcement. Several data sources offer insight into police use of force. Table 1 briefly summarizes the available sources of information. 3 of the data sources, deaths in custody, the Use of Force Incident Reporting System, sometimes called URSIS, hereafter referred to as the Use of Force Data, and the Racial and Identity Profiling Act, RIPA, STOP data, are collected and maintained by the California Department of Justice, DOJ, as required by federal and/or state law. The result of state legislation passed in 2015, the Use of Force Data and the RIPA STOP data are two relatively new and unique data sources available to examine police use of force. To provide a source of comparison, we also examine information from two additional sources: Fatal Encounters, a crowdsourced effort by journalists and researchers to record fatalities during police interactions, and the California Department of Healthcare Access and Information, formerly the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, OSHPD, which we refer to in the report, which publishes data on the cause of all injuries treated in hospital emergency departments and inpatient settings. 4. Note that the Use of Force Data, Fatal Encounters, and Hospital Discharge Data account for all use of force incidents with officers, regardless of whether they are on duty or off duty. We discuss all of these data sources in more detail in Technical Appendix A. Nearly 200 people die each year in police encounters. Figure 1 displays the annual counts of fatalities from law enforcement interactions from 2016 to 2019, as reported by three different data sources: the DOJ's deaths in custody, the DOJ's use of force data, and the crowdsourced fatal encounters. The two DOJ datasets are largely consistent with each other, indicating about 150 people, on average, are killed annually during encounters with law enforcement. The fatal encounters data include about 30% more fatalities, suggesting that 195 people die annually during police encounters. Importantly, these estimates do not indicate whether these deaths were considered the result of excessive or unreasonable uses of force, with many of them considered legally and procedurally justified. We discuss potential reasons for the differences across sources below, but first we consider what these numbers suggest about the extent of civilian deaths during law enforcement encounters. Based on the figure of 195 fatalities documented in fatal encounters, these incidents account for nearly 10% of the number of annual homicides, including those that are considered lawful, e.g., in self-defense. 5. At the same time, when we put these fatalities in the context of the large volume of arrests made each year in California, on average, about 1.2 million annually, this suggests about 16 fatalities per 100,000 arrests. Examining pedestrian and traffic stops among the 15 largest law enforcement agencies in the state suggests slightly over 2 fatalities per 100,000 police stops. 6. The differences between the DOJ sources and fatal encounters are mostly driven by the reporting of vehicle-related deaths. The use of force data does not include incidents where an officer accidentally kills a civilian with a vehicle, e.g., a high-speed chase that results in a fatal car crash, constraining serious use of force cases to ones that are intentional. 7. Notably, the use of force data and fatal encounters both include fatalities that occur when officers are on duty and off duty. Whereas deaths in custody only reports on-duty encounters, this might account for the lower number of fatalities recorded by deaths in custody for most years. Figure 2 shows the cause of death recorded across the three datasets. Gunshots are by far the primary cause of death. The fatal encounters data indicate more than 3/4 of fatalities are the result of gunshot wounds, while the use of force data indicate 90% of fatalities result from gunshots. Deaths in custody attribute about half of deaths to gunshots, though notably, this dataset also includes a sizable share of fatalities, 35%, that are still pending investigation. This tag of pending investigation was consistently reported from 2016 to 2019, suggesting that information on the cause of death is not updated after investigations are completed, something to consider remedying in order to improve data quality. Currently, law enforcement agencies have up to 10 working days to report a death in custody to the California DOJ, but there is no statutory requirement to update any missing information when an investigation is complete. Vehicle deaths, most often related to law enforcement pursuits and/or accidents, are a significant source of variation between fatal encounters and the two DOJ sources. About 17% of deaths reported in fatal encounters were vehicle-related, compared to about 7% in deaths in custody and no incidents in the use of force data, which does not seem to include any vehicle-related deaths as the highest level of force used, despite California Highway Patrol, CHP, being one of the primary reporting agencies. Reporters examining CHP data recently highlighted the underreporting of deaths from police pursuits or accidents when a law enforcement officer was driving. As the use of force data becomes the primary source for understanding police use of force in California, it would be helpful for lawmakers to ensure that the data encompass all instances when an officer's actions result in serious bodily injury or death, including car accidents and pursuits.